All right, welcome back to All Cars Y'all. My name is John. It is time for another Motorweek retro review reaction, and this week it is the 1983 Ford Escort GT. Yes, hang on to your chair. But it seems I've never done a reaction video to any of the Escorts, any of the three generations, and since I'm just about finished with a history of the Escort, I thought it was an appropriate time to take a look back and see what they said about this massively popular car through the 80s, three generations, lasted into the 90s, and then of course Ford just canceled the name and came out with the, Focus. So, as always, get comfortable, grab your beverage of choice. We've got some fully caffeinated caffeine today, and let's see what Motorweek said in 1983.
Motorweek is made possible by Rock Auto, Tire Rack, and Die Hard.
Ford brought out these little 2- and 4-door hatchbacks out in 1981, and everybody liked them, except the motoring press. They thought it was a pale copy of its European brethren. It just didn't handle or go as well as it should. Of course, the Escort became the best-selling car line in America, but Ford decided not to sit on those laurels. Enter the Escort GT, the closest thing to high-performance econobox that our #2 automaker could cost-consciously devise. Was it worth the effort? Should the average Escort buyer care? Let's find out.
Okay, before they get into it, let's talk about the styling a little bit. I have mixed feelings about it. When Ford decided they were going to create the Escort, and it was going to be a world car, and its genesis actually was many, many years before with a new style of engine. They decided they wanted to beat the best in the world. They went out and they looked at the Honda Civic and they looked at the Volkswagen Golf, and they kind of benchmarked that, and they came up with this. I'm not quite sure how they thought this matched either of those other two. And so kind of I feel two different ways about the styling on this car. In a broad sense, I think it's fine. I actually think it's a modestly handsome vehicle. The belt line is very straight. The roof gives good space inside. I like how it had kind of a trunk hatchback. It's relatively subdued for an American car as well. The problem for me was the long hood, and I can't find a straight answer. I suspect that was Ford wanting to anchor the car, as it were, in the 60s and the 70s cars. The people who were used to American cars having longer hoods and giving that to them relative to the super, super short hoods, say in a Civic or you know, what the Golf did. It ends up looking chunky. That's the problem. But it's not an ugly car. It's quite handsome, in my opinion, except for a few details, especially the front end, the grille, the headlights, a couple of other minor little things. But honestly, Ford cleaned those up over the years. So I'm going to give it a thumbs up on styling. I think that the front engine, small hoods, nippy little cars from some of the imports, I think those are better, more attractive. But the car has a little bit more presence to it.
Until recently, when Detroit wanted to bring out a sporty version of just about any old car, it was mostly a matter of paint and trim. Well, in the case of the Escort GT, it sure won't be hard picking it out in a crowded parking lot. Aside from some special colors, such as this orange called Bright Bittersweet, a good name for it, there's a lot of European-looking blacked-out rubber and chrome, and a pair of driving lamps. Much like its overseas brother, the Escort XR3, this GT features special lower body moldings and splash skirts which really do keep rocks from chipping the doors. Around back is a functional and smart-looking spoiler that adds a bit of class to the Escort's large glass hatch.
No, I'll disagree with that. I've always thought the Escort had kind of a weak rear end, but this spoiler is not the answer. I mean, literally, look at it. It looks like they went to Pep Boys, picked up a black spoiler, and then glued it onto an orange car. I like spoilers on cars, but this looks very much like the afterthought it was. Other than that, rear styling, I kind of like it. Again, it's a hatchback, but it's got just that little bit of trunk right there, and I like the lights extending like that. I would like to say they're a little too big and chunky, but for the time period, totally contemporary. There's not much here that's for the time that's wrong.
The interior includes a racy 4-spoke wheel and sports bucket seats with mesh-type head restraints. They are very comfortable, but the soft fabrics left us wondering about durability. The dash includes an upshift indicator and orange on black gauges that were very readable if incomplete. Except for the engine temperature, other motor functions, amps and oil pressure, were housed down on the shift console. This unit is obviously borrowed from the standard car since the gauges did not match the design of the other instruments. Much better was the sturdy and just right length shift lever connected to a very good 5-speed manual transaxle. Only the absence of a reverse lockout bothered our testers, who sometimes went backwards when looking for first. Interior fit and finish has been improved markedly and includes such oriental touches as dash-mounted nooks for small articles, a remote gas filler release, and this very nice feature, side window levers that open the rear quarter windows. But when Ford now says GT...
Okay, before they go on, we got to talk about the interior. I could be very critical of it, but it's fine. Again, we have to remember this is 83, right? The good news, let's start with the bad news. I don't like vertical controls on HVAC, and I don't know why. I wish they had caught on more in a lot of ways. They're an excellent use of space, but I don't know. I just don't like them. I don't know what else to say about it. But the good news is that when you look at the dashboard, it's like one big chunk of plastic. Now, it looks cheap, okay? It doesn't look like the highest quality plastic. But when you look at a lot of early 80s, mid 80s, even into the 90s in some cases, American cars, the dashes are really chopped up. There are many, many different pieces, and that leads to a lot of squeaks and rattles and movement between them. This was much more one big piece. Ford, argue with me if you want, was one of the more forward-thinking of the American manufacturers at the time. But then after you get to the top part of the dash, there's this gap, this chunk before you get to the lower part where a really hideous set of gauges is set, honestly. Ford giveth and Ford taketh away in this case. For the time, and because I have had quite a bit of experience with a 86, as I recall, one of these, my first wife when we were dating, she had a Mercury version of this. It's not an interior that makes you go, wow, but it was perfectly, ultimately functional in what it did. And for the price, that's what you're asking for.
Mean a lot more than unique paints and spiffy interiors. Now they mean a multi-port, electronically fuel-injected version of their 1.6-liter overhead cam 4. That delivers 82 horsepower, 12 more than the standard engine, and 2 more than the non-injected high-output version. And how does all this come together on the road? A whole lot better than before, but not as well as expected. The prototype we drove last year was a lot quicker than this car's 0 to 60 time of 14 seconds. However, that's a second and a half better than the standard car. Power seems to come on late at around 1500 RPM and is gone much above 4000. So starting power is weak and you have to get to second and third quickly. A 500-foot dash of 10 seconds at 54 has to be rated as only average. On the plus side, you can lug the engine in fifth gear all the way down to 30 miles per hour without complaint. And the narrow power range is outstanding for passing. Only 5.2 seconds is needed to spring from 40 to 55 miles per hour. But with a quarter-mile time of 19.5 seconds and a speed of only 72, it's clear that the Escort GT still needs more spirit. For the record, most acceleration times were about 13% slower than a car it will no doubt be compared to, the smaller but friskier Volkswagen Rabbit GTI. But that's not a bad comparison, since in handling, the other half of what we usually call performance, the Escort GT drew nothing but praise. Quick rack and pinion steering connected to a revised TR Performance suspension package and Michelin TRX tires made the Escort almost pure fun to sling around. Flat cornering counters moderate understeer, but it can go quickly to oversteer and to a hanging out of the rear end if you lift the throttle. But there's no sign that control can be lost without really trying. In our handling test, we also became kinder towards available power.
Before they go on, let's talk here for a minute. I wish I had gone back, because many years ago I did a reaction video to the Pontiac, was it the T1000? And that was a dog. Gosh, that was slow. Of course, that was a much older design and rear-wheel drive, and I think it might have been some kind of Miser edition or something like that. But it was, oh my gosh, it was horrible. What's fascinating about this is that, again, when Ford started to design the Escort, it all started with essentially a Hemi engine, which they wanted to be among the best in the world with. But then they came out with something that was just, it had no power. They bragged about it. People raved about it. I have articles behind me where people raved about this engine, but it was a dog. This has 12 more horsepower, and it's still kind of a dog. There's no situation where I would rather drive this than a Rabbit, a base Rabbit, if I wanted a engaging, peppy, lightweight experience. Now, through the slalom, they're talking about how good the handling was, and I take issue with that. The Escorts I've driven, and especially that Mercury that I've driven many times, it was a boat, okay? It was a bathtub on wheels. And it was an American car in that it could do the numbers, right? It had maybe the skid pad or the speed through the slalom, or it hit the numbers, but the feel was boat, right? Like you were muscling it through, and that there was just an incredible amount of mass around you doing it. Whereas you get out of that and you get into a Honda, a Toyota, a Nissan at the time, a Volkswagen, and they felt light and nimble and like they danced with you, right? This didn't. Now the payoff was it felt like a more substantial car. And that's important, especially to buyers who maybe they would like a bigger car, but they can't afford it. And they also are going to take it on the interstate. You know, suddenly you've got a longer hood. It looks a little more American. It rides a little softer, and everything comes together. But still, the engine just was a weak point, and it was for a long time. Eventually, they got it straightened out. And eventually, they made it as competitive as anything else out there. But gosh, there was a lot of missed opportunities here for Ford, in my opinion.
That in most maneuvers, the combination of 88 pounds of torque and stiff struts and shocks makes for a near perfectly balanced Cub racer, right up there with the GTI. Brakes are a combination of power-assisted ventilated front disc and rear drums. They got high marks. Straight stops from 55 averaged only 111 feet after 6 panic stops. There was some brake pad burning, but little lock or fade.
Well, and it has to be said, for what's supposed to be the GT version, and for still having rear drums here, I think later versions had disc brakes. And of course, no ABS. That was a fantastic stop. That was absolutely fantastic. No drama, no lockup, no pulling, short distance, excellent marks for Ford.
But at this point, we have to address the average Escort buyer. You'll find this combination of sporty tires and hard suspension to be very harsh and jarring over all but the smoothest of roads. While drivers with delusions of Le Mans might love it, most folks won't. But to its credit, even after 7,000 of those rough miles, our little Ford had nary a rattle. And further credit should be given to mileage. While the EPA rates the GT at 29 city and 44 highway, you can still expect at least the 35 we recorded over our 100-mile test loop.
That's fantastic. That really is. Admittedly, my Accord is much bigger and much more powerful and much heavier. Well, and much safer. But that's largely what I get in my Accord, and that's an automatic. That's a CVT. That's what you get with an automatic transmission and a manual transmission and not much power.
So all things considered, including a modest base price of $7,239 and our test car at $8,400, the Escort GT does have its niche. And next fall, when a turbocharged Escort makes its way into the rabbit patch, Ford purists might just have Hassenpfeffer for breakfast.
Okay, so that was fun. I hope you all enjoyed that one as much as I did, because I guess I can phrase it like this. I respect the Escort because it came out and was an immediate sales success. It was one of the top selling vehicles all through the 80s. And of course, it eventually changed to a more Mazda-based platform and used at the top end a Mazda engine. And it had station wagon versions and everything else. It was such a flexible platform. But I don't love the car. Certainly in hindsight, and certainly if you were casting a net and be like, well, I just want to buy the best, and you look at Chrysler, GM, Toyota, Honda, Nissan, or maybe what Mitsubishi or somebody else is offering, Renault. There you go. There's a good one. Many of them are better cars to drive. Many of them would be that more light and nimble and certainly throwable around, or just more fulfilling to drive in the city. And again, I've driven one of these probably in the hundreds of times. But if you and I were to press our magic go back in time button, and it's 1983. And again, I have my biases in the 80s of not wanting one of those Japanese cars. And I am therefore narrowed down to Chrysler, a General Motors offering, or this. There's no doubt I'd get this car. In fact, looking at, without some of the biases towards the Japanese cars, like say Toyota's such perfect reliability, I still would choose this car because a lot of that styling that makes it, I believe, more American, that longer hood and things like that. I think it ends up just being an unbelievable package overall at a really, really good price point. It's hard to look at 83 in America and say that when you're looking for value and comfort and reliability, that throwing in with Ford and buying an Escort is not the right answer here. Tell me what you think below, guys. I appreciate you being here. Thanks again.